one of the coolest things about writing military science fiction in general is coming up with a weapon system that is not what everybody else has written
Yeah.
before, you know?
Right.
I got this one in
Right.
Archangel that I'm really excited about.
Tell
As
us all
somebody,
about it with details so we can copy it.
yeah, well, I mean, somebody will copy it eventually if they haven't already. But it's called a Medusa. It's a kind of a pistol that's used by. He steals this from basically a space cop. It's a multi. It's like different ammo feeds from the same magazine, and it shoots with a coil, like an electromagnetic coil. And you can shoot either armor-piercing tungsten darts, or you can shoot sintered metal that it is accelerated by the magnet, and at the muzzle is ignited by a small laser into a plasma round that's anti-personnel instead of armor piercing. Or you can shoot at a slower rate of a slower velocity these darts that have like an electric charge that can stun somebody if they're not
Can
wearing
you
armor.
hold it up? Can you hold it up and say double whammy? And then the pistol
No,
goes double whammy, and then you shoot two guys at the same time.
no.
Troopers fall through an endless sky. Military sound and science fiction contest.
Get smart, James.
I know. Well, I've been playing with
Love
this
that show.
MacBook all this morning, and it's like I've been using older versions of Mac OS for a while, but this new one is just like it can do this and it can do this, and it's pretty fun. Okay, we're not here to talk about MacBooks. We're here to talk about military science fiction. So
We do not use Macs.
well, hey,
Use Max, not Max.
I know. Well, there could be a dystopian future where Apple has, absorbed everything, and so everybody could be using Macs.
And all the restaurants are Taco Bell.
Yes.
I mean, on the one hand, the fact that everything would work would be great. But on the other hand, they're not soldier proof. So
This new one's pretty sweet. Anyway, hey, welcome to the show. This, if you did not know, is the Military Science Fiction Podcast. My name is James Stiegel, or also James S. Aaron, if you're looking me up on the internet. I'm joined today by Jeffrey H. Haskell, author of the Grimm's War series, Rick Partlow, author of many series, including the Drop Trooper series, and Josh Hayes, who is operations manager for Aeon Books and also
Aethon.
Aethon. Back it up.
And your publishing contract just went away.
I know. Womp, womp, womp. Operations manager for Aethon Books and the author of the Valor series. Look up Josh Hayes Valor and you'll find many excellent things to read. We have a Facebook group that we'll talk about at the end. You should check us out. I should also mention that we're all veterans, and if we had stuck around, we'd probably be retired by now. And we like to talk about military science fiction. Today we're
I also
talking
like to write about it.
I know, we also like to write about it, and we've written quite a few things about it.
Question real quick, James, before you get
Yeah.
started. I gotta ask Rick a question. Rick, doesn't your universe have a name?
Oh yeah,
Oh,
Acheron, right?
no, Acheron
No.
is just one of the series. I have always called it the Birthright universe.
Birthright.
But most people who are familiar with just Drop Trooper call it the Drop Trooper universe. But for me, Drop Trooper series was like the fifth series I wrote in that universe. So I started that universe with a book called Birthright. So I've always called it the Birthright universe.
But that's, the Tiny are the primary antagonist
Yes.
in that, and the way the FTL works, yeah.
I was just
Yeah, in
curious.
fact, Rick has a whole, if you really like Drop Trooper, there are also some kind of pre-series that you should check out, which I think Glory Boy, or what would you call this series if they were searching for it?
Okay, well, there is like I don't know, there's like 9 or 10 different series in that universe. The first one chronologically, as in that history of that universe, is the Holy War series. The first one I wrote was the Birthright series. And there's 4 books in that, starting with Glory Boy, then Birthright, Northwest Passage, and Enemy of My Enemy.
I'd like to point out that a lot of those old series have covers by Vivid Covers,
That's true.
or they did at one point.
Yes. So if you'd like to follow the evolution of Rick Partlow, which everyone should. Speaking of evolutions in military science fiction, we're talking about technological change and how that affects militaries and how that also affects writing about it in the future and trying to imagine it in the future. So technological change and how that affects military science fiction. I want to hand this off because I need to compose my thoughts about it, especially since we live in a time where things are changing so rapidly that sometimes it's hard to figure out how things are going to look. But also, I think from a military perspective, we also have now seen times where threats emerge, technologies emerge to fight those threats, and then new technologies emerge, and then everybody kind of scrambles to figure out how to use those to accomplish their aims. So, does anybody have anything they'd like to start out with?
I want to address the elephant in the room. Rick, no.
Thank you.
Drones.
Yeah.
So here's the thing: is right now we're watching some drone warfare happening in Ukraine, but it's not really drone warfare. It's people with RC drones off the shelf, which have been available for 40 years, strapping grenades on them with duct tape and then flying them into the enemy. We're not really seeing symmetrical drone warfare, like between China and Russia or us and somebody else. So I know there's a lot of people who are like, drones are the future of warfare, but coming from a commo perspective, I promise you they're not. They're just not.
I mean, we are getting to some weird places, Israel,
Drones are the future of
Palestine.
reconnaissance.
Yeah.
And that's where they've been using AI.
We've been using them forever for reconnaissance.
But they're using it to drive fires and even handing off just like fire decisions to AI, which has had some really terrible results. But that feels more like on the edge of actual drone warfare to me than what you're talking about, Jeff, where it's still a human operated, remote device.
Well, I mean, even when they hand them off to AI, there isn't an AI that fits on a drone. Not the drones that are being used over there, maybe on a UAV or UCAV or something.
Yeah.
Not on a $40 Walmart special.
So cost $100 now.
I kind of went in a direction. So two of the things that popped into my head were drones and AR, augmented reality, which are two things that are kind of prevalent right now in not just the military space, but in entertainment, especially with AR. And so what I try to do is take what we have now, extrapolate it, and then add some things to it. So like with my drones, I've got multiple uses for my drones. They're not big UCAVs. Some of them are as big as your hand. Some of them are as big as an insect. Some of them are bigger than that. Some of them have weaponized platforms on them. Some of them are just observation. I have a couple of them that are called wasps that are more like an observation. And when it comes to AR, every person in the universe has it's not quite an AI, but it's a chip that it's like a smart chip, right? And so they utilize the smart chip and the internal peripherals there to kind of control, issue instructions, communicate, all that kind of stuff. But the drone programming is semi-autonomous, where they can detect threats and identify different things, and they can kind of move on their own without any direct control over or from the user itself, but they're still tied directly to the user. So they can shift position, they can zoom in automatically, and also all the controls are done through thought because of the implant, how it's connected to the brain and all of that. So there's not any, like, you don't have to carry around a tablet, like you see some special forces or even infantry guys now where they have the ATACs on the front of their kit. Sometimes that's just to see the feed, but also sometimes you can control the drones from there, because right now the infantry, I mean, they have the Black Hornet 2, I think is what they use right now, and that's just a little palm-sized helicopter that they can
Black
throw
Hornet
up in
2
the
sounds
air.
like the sequel to a superhero movie, by the way.
It really does. It really does.
I talked to a neurobiologist when I was doing some Grimswar stuff. Oh my gosh, I can't think of his name off the top of my head. But we were talking about implants, and I was asking him about like the feasibility of implants in your brain if there was like the possibility of having concussive forces, like explosions and things like that. And he said that there's no way currently imaginable to take something that is implantable, like metallic, put it in your brain, and then not have it shred your own brain during a concussive explosion. Which is why in Grimm's War they don't have any implants. It's because, not that there couldn't be a way down the road, but
right.
in the meantime,
Most of
I couldn't think of a way to do it.
So when I did at least the neural implant section, there are other peripherals that you can get installed and use. But for the most part, like the base, I call it the I3, which is an integrated internal interface. The base unit is implanted almost at birth or right after birth, and it grows with the user. So it grows inside the brain. It's a nanotechnology. So and it's almost like a bio
Yeah,
technology where
that's the way
it's
you have
not
to
like a
Yeah, I mean,
postulate
bio
it.
is something we
it's
don't
not like a
see a lot.
yeah, right. It's not like a metal computer that somebody
Right.
puts in your head. It's like a bioorganic nanotechnology that is fused inside your brain and grows with your brain and your brainstem, and it's integrated in throughout your whole body.
That's pretty cool.
So that so it doesn't have those types of effects where you're putting in something else and then external effects affect it differently.
In the Glory Boy books, they were just starting to experiment with what they call head comps,
Mm,
and they used this material that they've just invented called biomer, which was an electrically active culture.
Right.
It was infused with polymer, to strengthen it, and they could inject that into your brain and then use like electromagnets to draw it to where they wanted it to go and to form into the shape they wanted it to. And that's how
yeah.
they
I
developed
mean,
it.
when the time comes, it's going to be like
Mhm.
manipulated banana slug cells that they've repurposed
Yeah.
using, carbon reinforcement, like Rick's talking about. I mean, that's
Well, and
hard to think of. Go ahead.
I took the idea of having that, and when I was brainstorming this, some of the
So to
stuff
speak.
around, yeah, some of the stuff around like the Google glasses and the Apple whatever big headset is, whether it's kind of like a
Vision Pro
yeah.
doesn't exist anymore,
Um,
apparently.
so I basically that not only is it in your brain, but it's in your uh not your eyes, but part of the brain
Your
that
ocular
receives the
nerve.
signal. Yeah, the
Yeah.
ocular nerve. And so it projects information through the ocular nerve so the user can see it. But it's not just their personal information. Like because most people are connected to the data sphere, information like call it the interweb if you want, the internet.
The interwebs.
Um, there are ads that are on buildings that are not actually there. They're in AR and they're
Right.
sent through your system so you can see it in
When we
your
hijack the ocular
field of
nerve,
view.
that's going to be wild because then basically
Yeah,
you're living in another reality at that point.
And then
right.
I've kind of approached everything with the sense of like, okay, you have a bunch of 18-year-old kids who are joining the military. The government's not going to spend $18 million each
Yeah.
implanting things into them. You know what I mean? Like,
In Josh's reality, there, people get this done as a matter of course, though, as he's saying, like when they're
Right. Yeah, they're
born.
born with it. They're now when you like I have military guys in the story and they get advanced like equipment, they get advanced peripherals, they get way more after the fact that is leaps and bounds over what like the normal
oh
human would
yeah, no,
have.
no. I was just,
You know what I mean?
I'm not discounting what Josh. I was explaining what I do, which is,
Oh yeah.
you got different cultures. You got 27 different cultures. All of them have different ideas about how technology,
Yeah.
integrates into society.
Well, that's
You
what I
know,
was going to say is that I think that a lot of whether or not this happens in the future is going to depend not so much technology, but on how receptive people are to having this stuff done to them or
Right.
doing it to their
Yeah.
kids.
I mean,
you're always going to have the people who are like, yeah, I want an Elon Musk implant so I can cheat at video games. But then
Right.
you have the people who have that
Yes.
great commercial about like, if you want to use your left arm, you have to watch a video.
I mean, it's already happened in
know?
there was a back pain system that I want to say it was mostly in Australia, but people had this thing implanted in their bodies to help them manage pain, and then the company went out of business, and they were trying to buy the company so they could at least continue using it, and nope.
Oh, the same thing happened with vision. There was an ocular implant that allowed a lot of people to see, and the company went out of business. and the implants all got shut off. And so you had about 10,000 people who could see and now can't because the company went out of business. So it's yeah. No, there's a lot of stuff. One of the emphases I put on in Grimm's War is like there's a couple of different ways you can approach science fiction. You can be like, I'm going to be the most sciencey science fiction thing ever, and just wild imagination. What can I do? You know, implants, and like I have some cyberware. Like one of my main characters has a cybernetic arm that's implanted using nanites and stuff to graft her bones. And the other one is the other way you can go is sort of like Mission Impossible 4, where everything breaks down. I love that about that movie. It wasn't the best Mission Impossible movie, but like everything broke down. Nothing worked right. All the glove fell off while he was trying to climb the creeks. What is that building called?
The Burj Khalifa.
Burj Khalifa. I kind of go that route with my technology because I feel like when I was in the Army, like I drove a 5-ton that was made the same year I was born. Most advanced piece of technology I had in the Army was the Stingar, the radio. And that was only because it was brand new. And then they used that for 30 years.
I mean, for me, it's actually like a blind spot I have to get past because that's kind of how I view everything to do with the military. Like the whole idea of like operators having like super cool stuff that can do all these cool things and it always works. And, you know, the president can sit in a ready room and watch I'm just like, no, that never works. Like that doesn't work at all. Like this soldier's going to screw it up. They won't remember it.
You can't even talk to my brother reliably when we're playing video games.
You can't. I mean, the president has watched.
Oh, I know, but I just don't.
In the ready room. I mean,
I feel like we don't hear of it all the times it didn't work, or
my
experience of it.
Probably the president isn't watching every time either.
I know, but I mean, you get what I'm saying. It's just like I don't think, in general, I find like most of it is a mix between like the Soviet idea of like let's just throw 1 million soldiers at something and figure that most of it's going to break, and like the U.S. like most of our stuff does work, but we're always kind of working against soldiers that don't care, stuff that doesn't work, the lowest bidder.
How many hours do we spend maintaining it before and after use?
Right.
Right. I mean, half your vehicles are dead.
Another thing to consider, though, in science fiction especially, is the nature of the military that you're writing about. Because as the United States and other Western countries have gotten more sophisticated with their weapons technologically, they've shrunk their militaries and concentrated more on, which is not working right this second because it's hard to recruit anybody, but for a while they were working on getting people who were more educated in the military. And that was the concept, was get somebody who's better educated, not some kid right out of high school, and have them do this stuff and have a smaller military. Now, as I said, recruitment has gotten harder, so they're back to just taking anybody they can get. But that was the idea back in the early 2000s. So
that's how I tell myself they suckered me in.
Yeah. So are you writing, like, I'll just use the dropshippers for like one of the examples. They would take anybody into the military, and most of the people were not smart enough to actually do the fighting. And that's, you'd think like historically the people who were the less than smart ones were the ones they would put on the front lines. But if you're talking technological military, that not just the current technology, but something way beyond that, they might start to filter out the people who can't handle that kind of technology until they get the best they can at the front lines using the highest tech. So
it's kind of a misnomer in general that infantry are stupid. Like I get, we all joke that I've met the dumbest people in the Army and the smartest people in the Army, but most things in the Army, are highly complicated depending on what's required. Common, like just think about urban operations and how complicated that is, and the skills necessary to be successful at that, or the skills to, any kind of operation now I feel like is so much more complicated than the average civilian realizes. And they think of a grunt as being a dummy carrying a gun, but that's just not the case. At least they need to be smart in the things they're doing to be effective.
Well, Josh was talking about augmented reality.
Yeah.
And I think augmented reality is going to be very important, especially if you're talking in a future war where you have, say you're in powered armor that has thermal sensors and
Yeah.
maybe sonic analysis that can pinpoint things, but just by how the sound waves bounce off of them, and satellite feeds coming from ships intermittently before they get shot down, or from satellites before they get shot down, or from drones before they get jammed or destroyed. And you're trying to fit this all into one image of the battle space. That's going to require some seriously efficient augmented reality that not just shows you all this, but shows you in a way you can use in a split second in a battle.
That's one of the things. That's
situation.
one of the things that I've done with my AR systems. And when it comes to the advanced tech, like I've got a spy that's got really high levels of internal peripherals, and he's got the WASP observation drones, and
He's
so
still
not only
peripheral
can
from William Gibson, Josh.
yeah, so not only can they show their viewpoint through like the camera feed, but what they can detect on the sensors, which I call deep scan, can be transferred to his real-time optical view that's enhanced in AR. So, for instance, if he's walking through a crowd and the drone detects somebody with a weapon, say 4 or 5 guys ahead of him, not only can it identify where the weapon is and show him on the feed, but it shows it in the AR in his vision in real time, and then it highlights the person and shows like tracks it's a real-time motion tracking and projection of the threat, so he doesn't have to look at another panel. He doesn't have to consider, if you're on a battlefield and you're seeing drone footage from above, it's not as easy as you think to for a regular person standing on the ground to extrapolate exactly where that thing is that you're seeing on the screen, because of the distance and the angle and all of that.
It's flattened out too.
Right. And so projecting that information directly onto his optical feed is a very good way to transfer the information, especially if he's working by himself.
And
but also
it's gonna wind up being sort of like playing a video game.
Have you guys seen the Army's new night vision goggles?
Yes,
the
I was about to mention
X27s.
that. I
got an image of it. Let me pop it up here real quick.
They're like, it's like a.
So yeah, it uses a Microsoft's HoloLens along with a different kind of night vision and it outlines everything on the battlefield, weapons, equipment, the whole bit.
So the X27 is actually a lot clearer than that. The X27 that they are testing right now with
Is that the one
special
that
forces.
Is that the one that that's similar to the new sight they have on the new battle rifle?
Yes.
The
X27s
it looks kind of cartoony. It looks cartoony, like the characters are outlined and they're very clear, but they don't look
in
real.
color.
They don't look real.
It's in full color. And
it's funny. It's why we don't have the HoloLens to use with our Xbox.
Right.
Because they premiered the HoloLens about 15 years ago. The Army, somebody at DARPA saw that and said, we're buying those and we're going to use those for the Army. And then they just vanished. Otherwise, you'd be playing Minecraft through your glasses on any surface you wanted to play it on.
The cool thing about the X27s is that the tubes or the goggles are not what you pull in front of your face. The goggles are mounted on your helmet and you pull down the mask in front of you. But also the downside of it is that it's not just like the what is it, PVNS, PVNVs,
and PVS7s.
There you go. Is the batteries are in the unit and it's on your head. The battery pack is actually on your back and you've got a line that goes up to the rig on your helmet. But the interesting thing about those is that they can wirelessly connect to cameras in vehicles. So if you're in like a APC, you can access the video feed from outside of the APC on your night vision goggles and see what the vehicle can see outside before you get out. And the same thing, you can do that through helicopter and all of that stuff. And that's like real technology right now.
I've been doing that
Yeah.
in military science fiction for a while, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, this is another case where reality catches up with the
Right.
science fiction,
100%.
and you
You
look
know,
like, oh, you're just writing the stuff that they have now.
Mhm.
one really big piece of why the Afghanis did not like us was that we operate at night, and they saw that as such a huge invasion of their privacy, because that's when most people would go
Wah,
outside.
wah.
I know, but that's, I mean, when you, it's just kind of a note if you're thinking about, okay, what can I, if you want to add some flavor to how tech affects real world, issues. There were a lot
One
of
of the
times they
things
asked us not to operate at night in their villages.
One of the
one of the
things
things
I
about
did
the
was
extrapolation from technology, really quick before I forget about it, is that to what Rick said about the night vision, and he's been doing it for a while in his books, and now it's real, and people are like, whatever. It's really, really hard to extrapolate what is actually going to happen. First of all, we
Right.
don't know like the real high tech stuff that DARPA's doing right now that's potentially 50, 60 years of what we are in like modern access
UAPs.
technology. You have no idea where that's going to be in the
In New
next 10
Jersey.
years.
Yeah.
And so even the craziest things that we can think of, DARPA's probably already doing right now or on the cusp of doing. So any innovation that you come up with is probably going to be a reality, even if
Yeah.
you're writing it a couple hundred years in the future, except for like FTL and stuff like that. But like basic military technology. I mean, look at people were writing about having video feeds on their rifles and shooting around corners, and that was a thing like 10, 15 years ago. I mean,
Yeah.
it wasn't a
that
very
was the thing
good
in the
thing.
80s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it all comes back to,
It
like
wasn't the 80s.
we've
It was a
talked
little
about,
later than that.
there's constraints placed by governments, there's equipment
Mhm.
that's available, there's the terrain, the enemy gets a vote. So all the, you can have the most whiz bang tech in the world, but if it has no batteries, or there's something else that makes it, like if you've trained to use night operations and this is how you fight, and then somehow the enemy affects your logistics and kills all your batteries, which like the Israelis have done very effectively. All of a sudden you got to change the way you're fighting. And so I think when you think about ways to take a story in different directions, or you're thinking about the whole world of your story, I think this is pretty important stuff to think about, and none of it is foolproof.
Also,
Right.
it's important to remember when it's necessary to be vague and when it's necessary to be specific.
Mm.
With special technologies like night vision goggles and sensors and things like that, I tend to be vague, just because I want my characters to have the information. I don't necessarily need to make the reader understand how they're getting that information, because I can say they can see at night, they have night vision, the thermal, whatever, without getting too specific about how that technology works, because I think everybody at this point understands that we have that technology.
Sure.
But the stuff that maybe we don't have right now is where I tend to get specific, like the nanite reconfigurable rifles and things like that.
Um, the thing with night vision you were talking about, James, in my concept for the future is going to be, I would call it like layered sensors, if you will. I mean, you're not just going to have, like, say you're in a powered exoskeleton, like the kind that we're working on now, like the Onyx system that the Army's been working on forever, and all we're waiting on is a power source. Say you're in a future where they have that power source, and you're wearing this thing, and you've got a helmet that's got augmented reality, like those night vision goggles, like all that stuff that Josh was talking about, where it pulls it all into like a computer animation. Well, if that shuts down, I would like to think that somebody in the military is smart enough to know you still have to be able to see at night. And we are
Yeah.
working on technology right now where you can fit night vision into a pair of glasses, like regular glasses or goggles. So why wouldn't you have like a pair of those that you can slip on, and a like in um, Edge of Tomorrow
Yeah.
when they get out of their jacks, Tom Cruise slides.
That's basically what
What?
Onyx looks like, is a jack. I got
Yeah.
some on the screen
Let
right
me let
now.
me finish though. Tom Cruise slides the part of the weapon out of the main weapon that he can carry while he's walking around. And to me, that's a cool idea that you plan on these things breaking down,
Yeah.
and you have some kind of way to fight, even if the main thing breaks down.
So when Jeff said drones, my hearing being messed up like it is, I heard phones
That's what
in
I
the
heard
elephant
too, James.
in the room, and I actually think phones are absolutely the elephant in the room, because when I
Oh
think
yeah,
about a lot of the targeting that has been done, like in Ukraine, like
yeah. The Russians.
Please
The
stop
Russians
Yeah.
using
want
your
to.
personal cell phones for
Yeah,
military
Right.
communications.
And
yeah.
I'm begging
intel
you.
that has been gathered, and the like, think about the cultural piece of the North Koreans getting into Ukraine and being able to buy phones, and now they've got access to stuff that they've never seen in their lives.
So
And
it's funny that Pornhub is probably going to bring down North Korea because those soldiers are going to go back to North Korea,
yeah,
not going to have access to it.
but that's the kind of detail, that
They don't have access to it in Florida or Tennessee right now.
VPN sales are way up.
Or
Yeah.
Utah, thankfully.
I find that stuff fascinating, because in military science fiction, that's where you can take a technological change, push on it with like the need for violence, and then also drive cultural pieces of this, right? Because you hand
Yeah.
this to an 18-year-old soldier, and or the 18-year-old soldier is going to find a way to bring that phone. Like, they will, it's like in prison, man. They will take that phone apart and they will hide it in parts of their their equipment.
I
I
think
mean,
that
it's
the
just
military would be wise to, rather than trying to police personal phones as much, to issue a phone that will do a lot of the stuff that a normal phone will do,
Doesn't
but that
connect to
has
cell
military,
towers.
yeah, but that has military security on it, so they can't give away their position and things like that, but will allow them to do stuff like go on approved social media sites
right.
with censored stuff.
And most of them just
Put
want to
stuff
talk
you
to
can't say where
family.
you are, stuff like that, you know?
Yeah. You take away their ability to talk to family. Like, I cell phones were just coming on the scene when I, deployed, and people had sat, like, if I had a buddy that spent the money on a sat phone, and it was just a completely unapproved sat phone that he took to Iraq.
Yeah.
And you think about that. I mean, it's just not, I don't know. I think you're absolutely right, Rick. Like, if the government would get ahead of this stuff, but they don't.
Well,
So,
it's
Well,
here's something to think about. I just got approved for a beta test on my phone to use Starlink satellites to message in places where there's no cell signal with T-Mobile. Um, Say some kid goes to Syria, takes his phone that has that on it, he's messaging live from Syria, via Starlink
right.
on his
And
cell
Starlink
phone.
is not secure.
And one of the nice things one of the nice things I like about writing military sci-fi is you get to do all this stuff, but at the same time, most of my stories in books take place on planets that don't have satellite or in deep space.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So there is a lot of like, you have to have communications awareness, and the guy who runs the comms on the ship is constantly talking about blackout conditions and things like that. But like when the soldiers are on the ground, like say James, where you're writing the story in Medio, there's no satellites, there's no personal cell phones. What would you do with them? You know what I mean? So it's kind of a something to remember, that like when you're sending soldiers places in space, there aren't necessarily going to be places that have access to that kind of technology or the ability to repair that kind of technology.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
One of the things
in
that
the drop trooper, when they go to hostile planets, that's a big deal. The fact that they can't always communicate with each other or with the ships in orbit, because you can only communicate line of sight with your other people, and you if you're lucky, you get like a fighter or an assault shuttle or a land or something that flies overhead, and you manage to get line of sight with them for a second and send them information, and they send it to you, and pass it on. But otherwise, you're in the dark and you're only going by the information you have when you started out.
there's a aspect of like modern day life right now that most people don't consider. And when you're talking about phones and communication and all of that stuff, it's that if somebody really wanted to, they could look at you and listen to you and know where you're at every minute of your day through your phone. And that aspect of life is something that I thought really heavily about with weaponized, because because all of these planets have what I call a data sphere, and everybody has these internal implants that connect and that they all do the stuff. Is that's a very important part of the spy's life and people that are hackers or whatever. How do you counter that? How do you get around that? And that's one of the things that I find most interesting to think about when I'm extrapolating technology is, yeah, I created a really cool ray gun, but how do you counter it? there's 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 the cool things that you come up with for your good guys or your bad guys or whatever, but then you've also got to come up with reasonable ways to counter what they're doing in that high technology, because for every arms race, when you create a weapon, there's always a counter or a balance to that. And so coming up with interesting ways to get around the tracking to spoof it, like using burner. I came up with a burner ID system that people can use, and the kind of concept of like VPN and proxy accounts where you can log into the system and do different things, but you can do it secretly without being tracked and all that kind of stuff. Those are really interesting things, just about that really don't have anything to do with military technology, but they're part of everyday life that a lot of people don't think about. And if you're doing like a really high tech society, that's definitely something that's going to be a thing, and maybe even more so. I mean, there's technology now where artificial intelligence can read the signals off of a Wi-Fi deal, or even the
Wi-Fi
Ethernet
router and
port
see
on
everybody
your,
inside the house. Yeah.
even out of the HDMI cable port on your laptop. They can read the signals through there and then extrapolate and project images of where people are in a room without having any cameras or scanners or sensors or whatever. And that technology is wild. And to be able to look at that kind of stuff, and
Time to start wrapping all your HDMI cables in tinfoil.
right. Well, it's just sometimes I think it's really hard sometimes as a MIL sci-fi author. And this is, I would hate, I don't want people to get caught up in this part of what I'm going to say, but there's so many things that are, that we're capable of doing right now, that if you try to write a story in the future, I think it's almost impossible for you to create an answer to all of the things that you would need to come up with for an actual real world in 500 years. There's just so many things, so many layers of things that you have to think about, that it's almost unreasonable to think about all of them. So when somebody says, well, if they have this, how come they didn't have this? And you're like, well, I didn't think about that because that didn't really affect the story.
Because I'm one
My
person.
thing is, yeah, my thing is, if you're writing a story and you're coming up with technology and you're innovating and you're creating things, make sure that it serves the story first. And if it doesn't, and if it's just like a cool aside, then don't spend that much time on it and don't worry about it. Don't explain where the I don't know, the signal goes, like if it's a cross planet freaking communication system or something. If it's an Ansible or faster than light communication, if that actually matters to the plot, then kind of research it and figure it out. But if it doesn't, just say that they talk to the other people. It's one of the things that I picked up from Tim Zahn when I was reading the Thrawn trilogy, and this happens in a lot of Star Wars books, is the travel is never talked about. Like the actual science behind the travel, even in the movies, it's not really ever explained or talked about.
Because it's not really
not important,
pertinent.
But it's not necessary to the plot,
until
right?
the Last Jedi, when it
right
suddenly became important. We're running out of fuel that we've never run out of before.
I spent actually a lot of time.
Yeah, that was really.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Valor trying to figure that out, but in Weaponized, I realized that the travel doesn't matter. Yes, they have faster than light travel, or they can get to planets.
It only matters if it's important to the plot.
100%.
Well, I would even say if it's important to the characters, because
right,
it's the characters that keep people reading the story, and you want to see how do the characters interact with the technology, how does it impact their ability to solve whatever problem you've put in front of them. And I mean, I just read a book called Dragon's Egg, which came out in 1980. It's basically about the idea of aliens on a neutron star that floats into our solar system. And the guy that wrote it, Robert Forward, was an actual, physicist. And it's all about that. Like, it's all about describing how the star collapses, how it propels itself out of that far solar system, how it gets here, how the little slug people develop. And that's all super cool stuff, but his characters were terrible. I mean, the characters only exist in service of talking about basically a science class on how these little people could, survive. And it's still fun to read, but it's not like if it had been any longer or been a series, I don't know that I would have kept with it, like once it's not cool anymore.
One thing I really
Right.
liked about David Weber was is he went 2/3, I think, of the way through on Bastille Station before he talked about the FTL.
Hmm.
Because he didn't start talking about it until it became important to the story.
I mean, when
100%.
you're
Yeah.
writing military science fiction, the nature of the FTL can be very important because if you have an FTL that you have to come out through a fixed point in space and everybody knows where you're coming out of, well, they're
Yep.
going to put a whole bunch of
Right.
defenses there and try to blow the crap out of you when you come out, and you're going to have to find a way to get through that. Whereas if you have something like Star Wars hyperspace where you jump out,
Wherever.
wherever, then there's no way to set up a static defense against you. You have to have patrols. It's going to be it's important to the plot. It's important to the type of war you're fighting, and it can be important to the individual depending on what level they're at and how much they know about. Like there was in the one Drop Trooper book 2, he's trying to figure out how can we keep getting the crap blown out of us every time we jump out of transition space. Isn't there some way around this? And if you have a character who's involved in the planning or the strategy, it can be very important, like how you travel.
I mean, to me,
I think
it's
the only thing that I came up with for my travel and weaponized, as far as a limitation, or as far as we talk about this thing, is that it's got to be basically outside of the gravity well.
Yeah.
It's got to be out,
Yeah.
like not quite to the Lagrange point, but pretty close. And depending on the size, like if it's I've in book 2, I've got a big asteroid mining colony basically that's on a large asteroid, kind of like what's that one in our solar system that's really big? Is it
Ceres.
Phobos or
Ceres.
Sirius? Yeah.
Sirius.
It's kind of like that. And so there's obviously going to be a gravity well or some kind of gravity around that, but it's not as expansive as it would be around the planet. But you've still got to get outside of it to make that transition. And that's really like I try to keep it really simple because I didn't want to do any math.
See,
Oh, you
I
can do
lo-
that.
I
You can do
I
that
like
on
doing the
math.
math. I really get into. I really like. I've got there are fixed points in space, but they're fixed points in space that move relative to the solar system. So
Yeah.
they aren't fixed points in space, but they are. It's really interesting. But I mean,
They're
I
fixed,
didn't
they're
really
fixed points in space, but the stuff traveling through space isn't fixed. So
right, and so they always have to stop and find it before they can go down the lane. But I don't. I only touch on it really briefly in book 1. I don't really get into it until book 2 when it becomes important.
but like in Drop Trooper, it's not really that important to the plot because he's a Marine. But say in Glory Boy, where there are a bunch of commandos who are in their own ships and they're as much pilots as they are, special forces, that becomes really important because if you are jumping into a system and you're just one ship and you don't want them to know you're there, you have to know all kinds of stuff about where can I jump in, how can I mask the signature of me jumping in.
Right.
It just depends on who you are in the story.
And one thing I was going to bring up earlier is that when it comes to discussions of technology, like, I mean, this happens a lot when, like, I love talking about guns, love talking about the different things about it, about a weapon and how it works and whatnot. But sometimes, like, an author can just rattle off stats about a weapon that don't really affect
Yeah.
or how the characters use it. And, like,
Mhm.
why is this caliber important? Why is this range important? Like, how does this affect
Although
the
James,
soldiers?
this is not a writing thing, but it is a military science fiction thing. A lot of the people who read military science fiction love the gun porn.
I know,
So-
but I want the gun porn to matter, I guess, is what I'm saying here. Like sometimes it doesn't matter to the story. And other things like the details I love, like headspace timing on a 50 cal or barrel replacement or filling out a range. Like I didn't realize like we're not gonna hopefully not gonna fill out range cards in the future, but some equivalent of a range card or thinking about a sector the way that you would with a range card, no matter what format you use to track that. And if you've got a brand new soldier who's thinking about how the weapon actually works and what effect it has, That kind of stuff is interesting to me, and you don't
Or do
see it
you
a
have
lot. You know,
do you have an interlock on future weapon systems that work together with IFF transponders not to allow you to have blue on blue fire?
and
Oh,
that's
I've got that on.
You know,
I've got that in group somewhere.
mhm.
in answer to your question about the quote unquote gun porn stuff, what's interesting is that, you know, in a lot of modern day military thrillers, that's a big thing, but it's just because those weapon systems are real and people understand
Yeah.
what they are, right? And I've done something similar in weaponized, not to that extent, but like for instance, they fire, I call them pulsars instead of like pistols or pulse rifles or whatever, but it's an energy beam. But the beam is different sizes, so it kind of correlates to like a
Caliber.
like a caliber, right? So like most pistols shoot a 2-inch bolt, where like most rifles shoot like a 3-inch or a 4-inch.
2-inch? You're using the Imperial system in
Yeah, I am. because we're American.
Hoorah.
But so that's as close as I get to. I mean, I kind of like hand wave him some, like, you know how you have an M4, but it's like an XPR 27 or whatever like that. But it really
No, that's
doesn't mean
good.
anything.
That's good that you do that.
Military's gonna have that kind of
For
designation.
sure.
I mean, we
Yeah,
use,
yeah.
my guys use the Marines on board ships use MP-17s, but if they go on the ground deployments, they have M21 coil rifles, and
Yeah.
it makes,
You know,
it
one of
makes a
the
big
one of the
difference.
coolest things about writing military science fiction in general is coming up with a weapon system that is not what everybody else has written
Yeah.
before, you know?
Right.
I got this one in
Right.
Archangel that I'm really excited about.
Tell us all about it with details so we can copy it.
Yeah, well, I mean, somebody will copy it eventually if they haven't already. But it's called a Medusa. It's a kind of a pistol that's used by. He steals this from basically a space cop. It's a multi. It's like different ammo feeds from the same magazine, and it shoots with a coil, like an electromagnetic coil, and you can shoot either armor-piercing tungsten darts, or you can shoot sintered metal that it is accelerated by the magnet, and at the barrel, at the muzzle, is ignited by a small laser into a plasma round that's anti-personnel instead of armor piercing. Or you can shoot at a slower velocity, these darts that have like an electric charge that can stun somebody if they're not wearing
Can you
armor.
hold it up? Can you hold it up and say double whammy? And then the pistol
No.
goes double whammy, and then you shoot two guys at the same time.
No,
It's a
In
Judge,
opposite directions.
it's a Judge Dredd reference.
no.
You know,
You
but
do
that actually brings up a good point about voice control, because like a lot of, like in my books, the Marines have armor. They have like hardened armor they call space armor. That's a joke. And when they're in the armor, they have voice control over their grenades and other equipment as needed, right? So like they can pull out a grenade and go high explosive proximity detonation, and then they can throw it, because that's quicker than, you know, programming it on the grenade. But sometimes things are just too loud, and you just have to throw a grenade and press a button and throw it, you know.
That's when you need a what do they call that thing? The throat mic that
Right.
what do they call that? It's a
Subvocal.
subvocalization mic.
That's why I have the i3 in mind, because if they do that in mind, they can just think I want a high explosive fragmentation grenade and throw it, and they don't have to say it.
You better not have somebody whose mind wanders a lot.
Assuming the communications between you and the grenade works.
True. Very
You
true.
better not have somebody whose mind wanders a lot, though.
Yeah. And they're like, why did he just throw a banana? I'm hungry, dude. I'm hungry.
They
What
look.
happened if this grenade detonated right now? Oh wait, no, I didn't mean it.
Yeah.
I was going to point out is that I used to write a long time ago, before I was an established author, like back in the early aughts. I wrote a lot of Shadowrun fan fiction because I love Shadowrun. And one of the constant criticisms I would get is like, you got to stop naming your weapons. And one of the things about Shadowrun is like, you know, they don't just have pistols, right? You know, they got the Ares auto power, and they got the Colt Manhunter, and you know, why wouldn't you call it what it is in the book?
Right.
But I was always getting criticism both from editors and from people reading it, like, I don't need to know, it's just a big pistol. And that was the standard up until not that long ago, was to not talk about your weapon.
Huh. That's one of the things I love about Cyberpunk is it's Cyberpunk 2077. You can, I mean, there's all kinds of named weapons. You can name weapons. I mean, that really freaks you out. The stuff Rick's talking about, they have like is pretty prevalent where, you know, they've got mind control weapons that you basically just like pop and then all the rounds just land on whoever you want them to. Like who needs infantry? Like you just pop that off, you know,
Well,
100 meters away.
I mean, that is a lot of people who got into writing military science fiction, kind of like the whole details of the weapons. I mean, look at the role playing games, used like GURPS and
Yeah. I mean,
and what was
I
that
guess
one?
I'm
What
trying to
was
make
that
a
one
distinction where I
what was
like the
that?
details of the weapons. I just feel like sometimes it doesn't affect what the character's doing with
Yeah,
them.
I'm
You
just
just
saying
have to know. You just have
what
to
was the
give
name
it
of
to the
that
audience when they want it.
what was the name of that science fiction role playing game? You had
Traveler, Star Frontiers,
say again?
Traveler, Star Frontiers.
Traveler. Traveler. Like Traveler did a lot of that stuff too with weapon systems and all these details. And a lot of people got into this reading and playing stuff like that. So it's a very tempting thing for a military science fiction author to start going off into those tangents.
It's our version of info dumping.
Yeah.
People don't mind info dumps. It's just they have to happen at the right place. You know, you
Right.
have to be able to
Interesting.
tell, okay, now is when the person actually wants the information. That's actually something Rebecca, my wife, who was also an author, really taught me how to do right, which is you have to get to the place where the audience wants the information you're going to give, and then they're happy to sit there for an entire chapter and
Well,
read information.
it's like the say you create something like a minigun in your story, right? And you're setting it up to be used later in a chapter, and maybe your character is watching somebody man it, and in that opening description you can kind of say it's a 6-barreled minigun, or you can even name it as the whatever RPM 60 or whatever. But then you don't have to give all of the specs for that weapon in that introductory place when it comes to actually being used. And then you can say, like, they opened up with a cannon at 7,000 rounds a minute or something like
Right.
that. And then you're still giving the information, but it's not in a big dump where it's just like a technical manual on the weapon. It actually makes sense for that part of the story.
Unless you're having your main character who's new like attend a class and some guy is like rattling off. This
Rattling
is the
on,
special
right.
weapons. This is the M16 has an effective range of 700 meters, or it's a 5.56 by 45 round or 30 round magazine.
It's always a trope where they got to mention something, you know, has a tendency to jam at this, you know, this barrel heat or what temperature or whatever. And
Well, you know, I wanted to have a
Pay
chain
attention
gun,
to.
and I had to look it up to figure out if, like, would they still call it a chain gun? You know, why did they call it chain guns in the first place? It was kind of really interesting. And now they have guns that they call chain guns that are not strictly chain guns anymore. They just operate like that.
Isn't the
That's a lot of
Bradley's
the
gun
military.
isn't the Bradley's gun a chain gun, or is it not? I forget.
It's
20
not, no, because it doesn't actually use chains. Like
Yeah.
the actual,
Yeah, but I mean, do they call it a chain gun?
It's not,
right? They
I
do.
thought
They
it was,
call it a chain gun because it became the role that
yeah, but it's still belt fed, right?
Well, it's the Bradley's gun is it's
Yeah.
built off of a. I think isn't it? Or is
Yeah,
it
it's a
built?
20 millimeter belt fed. I thought. I
Is
guess
it belt fed?
now I gotta
I
look this
can't
up.
remember. I can't remember honestly.
like a lot of the things that happen in the military is they fill a role, and then even when they're replaced, that role is still called whatever it was that originally created that role. You know,
Right.
The 242 Bushmaster is chain gun is a 25 millimeter single barrel chain driven autocannon. So what do they mean by chain here?
So it is chain driven.
Well, I think maybe they're using chain. I mean, chain's the kind of word that can mean different things depending on how it's designed too, right? Like, I'm so I don't know. I'll have to get deeper into
but it's
this.
really interesting is how that terminology like evolves,
Yeah,
and you know how you can have like a chain gun that isn't necessarily what it was originally in the 1970s.
I don't want to be downrange from one. That's what I know.
Yeah. Well, so the turret on the front of the Corsairs is a 6-barrel chain gun that shoots 10 millimeter steel wrapped tungstens at 1500 meters per second. Anyways, it's
1,500 meters per second. Holy!
My technology is a little bit more advanced than your technology.
Is that like gravitic technology shooting that thing?
It's a coil gun.
Even a coil gun, that's 1,500 meters per second is freaking burning.
Well, also, my engagements happen between 100,000 and 1 million kilometers in space. So, I mean, like the technology that Grimm's War stuff uses is quite a bit different than this technology you have for your science fiction.
Well, I mean, they have the same technology, but they
use
if you're shooting at somebody, if you're shooting a physical projectile at somebody from 1 million kilometers away, they're going to be. It's not going to be a sure thing they're going to be there when that thing.
No, of course
gets
not.
there.
No. It's more like flak.
Yeah.
They're firing their coil guns, 20-millimeter coil guns released on the Interceptor. They have bigger ones on the bigger ships, but with the idea of where people are going to be or maneuvering them to where they want them to be.
Yeah. That is something I do in my books where space combat is preeminent. Like Holy Wars, all the ships are moving in what they call avoidance. What the heck?
What are you doing, James? Oh, there you are. Okay.
I'm showing the belt. There it is.
Yeah. Oh man!
Wow, they're moving in like avoidance maneuvers to try to avoid where their computers think the other guys will be shooting. And
the entire final battle of book 2 happens because they're fighting civilians who have armed ships who think they know how to fight, but have never actually been in a battle before, versus the Interceptor, which is people who've been in a battle before who have a military tradition. The thing is the thing about the big thing about ships in Grimm's War universe is the enemy is heat, and it's why they don't have rapid fire. I'm shooting on 500 rounds a minute out of the 20-millimeter coil turrets, is because they have to manage their heat.
The heat management is something that really handicap a lot of space battles if you used it realistically, which is why I always find some way to not.
I use it realistically. I love it. You get your interesting tactics and strategies through your limitations, not through your advantages.
Right.
How do you run silent in space if you're constantly generating heat? You can. You just can only do it for a short amount of time.
You can't do it without cooking the people inside.
Exactly right. You only do it for a short amount of time. Then you have to dump the heat. How do you prevent fires in a spaceship during combat? How do you all that stuff?
Getting rid of the oxygen.
Well, you get rid of the atmosphere. Yeah, you replace it with something inert like nitrogen.
Or you just have everybody on the ship be in vacuum suits and evacuate the ship during a battle.
Well, yeah, that's what we do. Is they're all in ELS suits and they get rid of the atmosphere, but they replace it with nitrogen. I forget the reason why I did it, but it has to do with.
Well, can you still get explosive decompression with nitrogen?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think if you drain the atmosphere,
they're wearing suits anyway.
But there was a reason.
Yeah, but it's the kinetic forces of the ship blowing open.
Yeah, there was. I have to go back and read it why I did it, but there was a reason for it, like having to do with electronics.
But with heat, I found a good hand wavium thing is if you have FTL that involves jumping to some version of hyperspace, I found that they can dump their heat into hyperspace is a good way to hand wave it away.
Well, I mean, my ships can dump their heat too. They just have to do it through a physical object that they pump all the heat into. Yeah. Plus, and then you have your power. You have your power, right? Like a lot of, like we were saying about the exosuits. A lot of the limitations isn't the technology we have to do stuff, but how do you power it? And then how do you get that energy from the power source to the thing that you want to power? And that's another big limitation on ships in the Grimm's War universe is moving power from one location to another. Because you also have to worry about the laws of thermodynamics. You lose power every time you move it. And then power generates heat.
Or a suggestion.
Well, I mean,
that's why I don't even pay attention to that stuff.
I do a little bit more hard sci-fi than you guys do. That's why. But to me, that's like the really like interesting, fun stuff about being a writer is like coming up with all those systems so that you have, like, I was reading about how they screwed up the Ford class aircraft carriers, at least the first two. The Enterprise will be the first one that actually works the way it's supposed to, because some genius thought they'd save money by making the sewage pipes smaller. And they didn't take into account that, people flush things down the toilet. They're not supposed to flush down the toilet. So now they have to spend $500,000 every 3 months clearing out the sewage pipes because they made them too small.
Nice.
Stuff like that is really interesting to me about technology and ships and how they're made. And I don't have it up here.
Just in general, I mean, building a thing like a ship is such a involved, like you need so many people involved in that,
I use this. I don't know if you guys can see this, but
Yeah, Jane's fighting ships.
yeah, I use this a lot for like looking at diagrams of ships and things so I can get an idea, because I want the ships to feel real. I want the technology to feel real. And that's something that, especially when you're dealing with like your average military unit, not the special forces guys and not like the, CIA or whatever, is that when people say military grade, what they really lowest bidder.
I know. And those pipes could be that
strongest
diameter because to get the funding to build the ship, the congressperson, like you can only use whatever a factory in their district that can only produce that gauge of pipe.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
that's why it's like that. We blame it on the scientists, but it's actually the funding that, blah, blah, blah. But there's so many
exactly.
ways you could do that.
So it's to me, those are all like the little interesting bits. And then you don't necessarily need to tell the audience all that. You're putting all that together. And then all of a sudden you have this really universe that really feels like it's lived in and real. And the number of people who've commented about, like, I can't believe your ships evacuate their atmosphere before battle. That's like, I've never seen it before. Or I know they do it in the Expanse, but I don't know why the way they do their battles is just, pointless. But other little things like that, it's just a lot of fun. And I someday I'm going to do a story like what Josh has done, because the other end of the spectrum is like, how much high tech stuff can I put into it to make it super cool,
Yep.
That's one of the things I really, really like about doing the Weaponized series the way I've done it, is because I can do so many different cool things with it. But the counter to that is then I've got to think about that stuff all the time when I'm writing, because that's their normal is walking down the street seeing all this stuff in AR. My normal is not that. So when I'm writing it, I have to force myself to think about that stuff. And it's not like, they've got to pick up a phone and make a phone call. No, that's not how it works. You've got to like really think about, this is the level of tech that they're using. This would be normal and all of that. And sometimes it becomes kind of more of a hassle than it's worth, but it's still fun.
Well, on that happy note,
I know.
to
Make it
like
fun,
our
which is the
videos.
other. I think the thing we should leave folks on is like, tech is cool, but make it fun. Rule of cool.
100%.
Yep.
Oh yeah. Make it correct for the story. Make it interesting for the story, and don't go overboard on stuff that isn't important to the story.
Yep.
Right.
And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our videos.
I love that.
I know.
I love that.
That's
well
fun.
done. Well done.
All right. Well, thanks for hanging out with us. We now have a Facebook group, so look us up on Facebook, as well as the Discord. So come check us out there. I keep updating the Discord link, so if it's not updated, just put a comment, and I'll put the most recent one in there. Or if you find us on Facebook, we can give it to you there too. So thanks for hanging out. We will see you guys next week. Later.
See you.
Reaction to the system on fire. Military science fiction contest. Stories every Wednesday. Military science fiction podcast.